As the sun set over the abandoned town, a group of teenagers gathered around an old abandoned mansion. They had heard rumors of strange occurrences happening inside, and they wanted to investigate. One of them, a brave girl named Emily, pushed open the creaky door and led the way inside. As they made their way through the dusty rooms, they heard strange noises and felt an eerie presence. Suddenly, Emily's flashlight flickered and went out, leaving them in complete darkness. They heard Emily scream and rushed towards the sound, only to find her lying on the floor, unconscious. They tried to wake her up, but she wouldn't respond. That's when they noticed something strange about Emily's eyes. They were completely white. Suddenly, she sat up and let out a blood-curdling scream, revealing that she was possessed by the evil spirit that had haunted the mansion for years. The group tried to run, but the possessed Emily chased after them, her eyes still glowing white. Just when they thought they were trapped, they heard a voice calling out, "Emily, come back." Emily stopped in her tracks and turned around, her eyes returning to normal. It was her mother, who had come looking for her. She explained that Emily had epilepsy and had a seizure while exploring the mansion. Her eyes turned white due to the seizure, but she was not possessed. The group let out a sigh of relief, but they knew they would never forget the terrifying experience. There was once a small town nestled deep in the woods, where the only way in or out was a narrow dirt road. The townspeople were friendly and welcoming, but visitors were rare, and locals warned outsiders not to venture into the woods at night. One stormy night, a traveler arrived in the town seeking shelter from the rain. The townspeople welcomed him warmly and offered him a place to stay at the local inn. However, as the night wore on, the traveler couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The townspeople seemed to be whispering and glancing at him with suspicion. Unable to sleep, the traveler decided to explore the town. He stumbled upon a small cemetery hidden deep in the woods, and as he walked among the graves, he heard a faint whisper. Startled, he turned around but saw no one. The whisper grew louder, and the traveler realized it was coming from a grave. He approached it, and to his horror, he saw his own name on the tombstone. In that moment, he realized that the town was cursed, and he was doomed to die and be buried in that very spot. The traveler ran back to the inn, but the townspeople had already locked the doors and barred the windows. Trapped, he sat alone in his room, waiting for his inevitable death. As the night wore on, he heard a knock on the door. He cautiously opened it, and to his surprise, he saw a stranger standing outside. The stranger explained that he was a researcher studying the curse that plagued the town, and he had discovered a way to break it. The traveler followed the stranger deep into the woods, where they found an old tree with strange markings on it. The stranger explained that by carving his name into the tree, he could break the curse. The traveler did as he was told, and in a blinding flash of light, the curse was broken. The townspeople, freed from the curse, welcomed him with open arms, and he stayed in the town for several more days before continuing on his journey. However, as he left the town, he realized that the stranger who had saved him had the same name as the tombstone in the cemetery. The traveler realized with a shock that he had been talking to his own ghost, and the curse had never been broken. There was once a small village in the mountains, where the winter snows were so heavy that the village was cut off from the rest of the world for months at a time. The villagers were hardy and self-sufficient, but every winter, strange things began to happen. One winter, a young woman named Maria disappeared from the village. The villagers searched high and low, but they found no trace of her. As the winter wore on, strange rumors began to circulate among the villagers. Some said that Maria had been taken by the spirits that haunted the mountains, while others whispered that she had run away with a lover. But one night, The village was awakened by a blood-curdling scream. The villagers rushed to the source of the noise and found Maria's frozen corpse lying in the snow, her face twisted in terror. The villagers were horrified, and they began to suspect each other. But one villager, a reclusive old man named Nikolai, claimed to have seen the spirits take Maria away. He told the villagers that the spirits were angry with them for neglecting the old ways and had demanded a sacrifice. The villagers were skeptical, but as the winter wore on, they began to experience strange happenings. Food went missing from storage sheds, doors opened and closed on their own, and strange whispers echoed through the night. Desperate to appease the spirits, the villagers decided to offer a sacrifice. They drew lots, and the unlucky villager was sent out into the night as an offering to the spirits. The next morning, the villagers were shocked to find that the sacrifice had worked. The strange happenings had ceased, and the village was at peace. But as spring approached and the snows began to melt, the villagers made a horrifying discovery. The body of the sacrificed villager was found frozen in the snow, his face twisted in terror just like Maria's. The villagers realized with horror that the spirits they had been sacrificing to were not supernatural entities, but something much more human and sinister. And as they looked around at each other, they realized that the real monsters had been living among them all along. There was a small town surrounded by dense forests, and the locals always told stories about strange things that happened in the woods at night. Most people avoided the forest after dark, but a group of teenagers, bored with their mundane lives, decided to explore the woods at night. The group consisted of 4 friends, and they set out into the forest with flashlights in hand. They walked for hours, enjoying the thrill of being out in the wilderness at night. But as they wandered deeper into the woods, they began to feel uneasy. Suddenly, they heard a strange rustling sound coming from the bushes nearby. The friends stopped in their tracks and shone their flashlights in the direction of the noise, but they saw nothing. They shrugged it off and continued walking, but the rustling sounds continued, and the friends began to feel more and more unnerved. As they turned to head back, one of the friends suddenly disappeared without a trace. The others searched for him but found nothing. They called out his name, but he didn't respond. The remaining 3 friends panicked and ran back towards the town, fearing for their lives. When they reached the town, they reported their missing friend to the authorities, who organized a search party. Days turned into weeks, and the search for the missing friend turned up nothing. The 3 friends were traumatized by the experience, and they never spoke of it again. However, years later, one of the friends was out hunting in the forest when he stumbled upon a strange campsite. As he approached the campsite, he saw his missing friend sitting by the campfire, looking older but otherwise unharmed. The friend was overjoyed to see him and asked him what had happened. But the missing friend refused to answer. Instead, he warned his friend never to go into the woods at night again, and then vanished into thin air. The friend returned to the town in shock and told his story to the other 2 friends. They were skeptical but went out to investigate the campsite. When they arrived, they found no evidence of a campsite or any trace of their missing friend. As they walked back towards the town, they noticed strange markings on the trees that seemed to be leading them deeper into the woods. They followed the markings, hoping to find some answers, but they soon realized with horror that the markings were leading them in circles. As they looked around in confusion, they suddenly realized that they were being watched. They shone their flashlights in the direction of the eyes watching them, and to their horror, they saw the missing friend, now much older and with a wild look in his eyes, standing in the shadows. The missing friend smiled a sinister smile and said, "I warned you never to come back into the woods at night." The 3 friends realized with horror that their missing friend had been luring them into the woods all along. and now they were trapped. In a small village nestled in the mountains, there was an old, abandoned mansion that had been left untouched for years. The villagers whispered that the mansion was cursed, and that those who entered would never return. But one day, a group of adventurous teenagers decided to explore the mansion. They broke in through a window and began to explore the dusty, cobwebbed rooms. As they explored the mansion, they heard strange noises coming from the walls, and they saw shadows moving in the corners of their eyes. As they entered the grand ballroom, they saw a beautiful woman dressed in a flowing white gown standing in the center of the room. She was ethereal and seemed to glow in the moonlight. The teenagers were mesmerized by her beauty and approached her, but as they drew closer, they realized that something was off about her. The woman's face was frozen in an eerie, unnatural smile, and her eyes seemed to follow them wherever they went. Suddenly, the woman began to speak, and her voice was cold and hollow. She warned the teenagers that they should leave the mansion at once and never come back. But the teenagers, feeling brave and curious, refused to leave. As they continued to explore the mansion, they began to experience strange things. They heard whispers coming from the walls, felt cold drafts in warm rooms, and saw objects moving on their own. Eventually, the teenagers found a locked door that led to a secret basement. They broke the lock and descended the stairs, but as they entered the basement, they realized with horror that they were not alone. In the dim light, they saw the woman in the white gown standing in the corner of the room. But this time, she was not alone. Dozens of other ghostly figures surrounded her, all staring at the teenagers with empty, soulless eyes. The teenagers tried to run, but the ghosts were too fast. They were surrounded, and the ghosts began to close in on them. Just as the teenagers thought they were about to be consumed by the spirits, the ghosts vanished into thin air. Confused and scared, the teenagers ran out of the mansion and back to the safety of their village. As they ran, they realized with horror that they had made a grave mistake. The mansion was not cursed, and the ghosts were not real. The woman in the white gown was actually a mannequin, and the ghosts were just projections. The teenagers had been lured into the mansion by a group of pranksters who had set up the mannequin and projection system to scare them. But as they looked back at the mansion, they realized that the real horror was not the ghosts, but the human capacity for cruelty and deception. Emily had always been fascinated by the old abandoned house on the edge of town. She had heard stories that it was haunted, but she never believed in ghosts. One night, Emily decided to sneak into the house to explore it. As she walked through the dusty, cobweb-filled rooms, Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The air was heavy, and she felt like she was being watched. She heard strange noises coming from the walls and saw shadows moving in the corners of her eyes. But Emily pushed her fear aside and continued to explore the house. As she entered the attic, she saw an old trunk in the corner. She opened it and found a dusty old book. The book was bound in leather and had strange symbols etched onto the cover. Emily opened the book and began to read. The words were written in a language she didn't understand, but as she read them, she felt a strange energy coursing through her body. Suddenly, the room began to shake, and Emily felt herself being lifted off the ground. When the shaking stopped, Emily found herself in a completely different room. The walls were lined with mirrors, and Emily saw dozens of versions of herself staring back at her. But as she looked closer, she realized that each version of herself was slightly different. In one mirror, her hair was red. In another, her eyes were blue. In another, her skin was covered in tattoos. Emily felt like she was losing her mind, and she tried to leave the room, but the door was locked. Suddenly, she heard a voice behind her. "Welcome to the reflection room. The voice said, "This is where we create your perfect image. You will never leave this room." Emily turned around and saw a figure standing in the shadows. The figure stepped forward, and Emily saw that it was a woman with a scarred face. The woman was holding a knife, and Emily realized with horror that she was the one creating the different versions of Emily. The woman began to walk towards Emily, and Emily knew that she had to escape. She ran towards the mirrors and tried to break them, but they were unbreakable. Emily was trapped, and the woman was getting closer. Just when Emily thought all hope was lost, she felt a strange energy coursing through her body again. This time, she felt a surge of power, and the woman recoiled in fear. Emily realized that the book she had found was a spell book, and she had accidentally cast a spell that gave her supernatural powers. She used her powers to break the mirrors and escape the reflection room. Emily never went back to the old abandoned house again, but she knew that the woman with the scarred face was still out there, creating perfect images of herself and others. Emily knew that she had to use her powers to stop the woman and her twisted game, but she also knew that it would be a dangerous battle. There was a legend in the small town of Willow Creek about a woman who lived alone in a house at the edge of the woods. They said that she was a witch and that she had made a deal with the devil for eternal life. One day, a group of teenagers decided to sneak into the woman's house to see if the legend was true. They climbed through a window and began to explore the house. As they walked through the dark, dusty rooms, they saw strange objects and symbols that they didn't understand. Suddenly, they heard a creaking sound, and they realized that someone was coming. They hid in a closet, but as they waited in silence, they heard a sound of footsteps getting closer and closer. The door to the closet opened, and they saw the woman standing before them. She was old and wrinkled, with piercing green eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. The teenagers were paralyzed with fear, and the woman began to laugh. "You're trespassing in my house," she said, "and now you must pay the price." She pointed a gnarled finger at them, and the teenagers felt a cold energy wash over them. Suddenly, they felt like they were being pulled down, deep into the earth. When they opened their eyes, they were in a dark, damp cave. They tried to stand up, but they realized that they were bound by invisible chains. They looked around and saw that they were surrounded by hundreds of other people, all bound in chains as well. They tried to scream, but their voices were silenced by the woman's magic. The woman appeared before them again, and she began to explain her twisted plan. "I'd have made a deal with the devil," she said, "and in exchange for eternal life, I must sacrifice 100 souls every year. You are now part of my sacrifice." The teenagers realized that they were trapped and that there was no escape. They were doomed to spend eternity in the underground cave, along with the other victims of the witch. But just when all hope seemed lost, one of the teenagers remembered something that his grandmother had told him. She had taught him a spell to break any curse. He closed his eyes and recited the spell, and suddenly, the chains that bound them broke apart. The other victims watched in amazement as the teenagers stood up, free from their prison. They ran towards the exit of the cave, but as they approached the entrance, they saw the woman waiting for them. She was furious, and she began to cast a spell to trap them again. But the teenagers were ready. They had brought a piece of iron with them, which they had learned could break a witch's spell. They threw the iron at the woman, and she screamed in pain. The woman was weakened, and the teenagers were able to escape the cave. They ran back to the town and told everyone what had happened. The legend of the Witch of Willow Creek was never spoken of again, but the teenagers never forgot what they had experienced. They knew that evil was real and that they had the power to fight it. Maggie had always been fascinated by the abandoned mansion at the edge of town. It had been empty for years, and people said that it was haunted. But Maggie didn't believe in ghosts, and she was determined to explore the mansion for herself. One day, she decided to sneak inside the mansion and see what secrets it held. She climbed through a broken window and found herself in a dusty, cobweb-filled room. As she made her way through the mansion, she heard strange noises and whispers coming from the walls. But she ignored them, thinking that it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. As she entered a room with a large mirror, she saw a reflection of herself that was different from her own. The reflection had dark circles under its eyes, and its skin was as pale as snow. Maggie tried to look away, but she couldn't. The reflection began to move on its own, and it stepped out of the mirror and into the room. Maggie was frozen in fear as the reflection approached her. It reached out and touched her, and Maggie felt a cold energy wash over her. Suddenly, she was no longer in the mansion. She was in a dark, misty forest, and she realized that she had been transported to another world. She heard a voice behind her, and she turned to see a dark figure looming over her. The figure had horns and a long, sharp tail, and Maggie knew that it was a demon. The demon spoke to her, promising her power and riches beyond her wildest dreams if she would do his bidding. Maggie was tempted, but she knew that making a deal with a demon was dangerous. She refused the demon's offer, and it disappeared into the shadows. But Maggie was not alone. She realized that there were other people in the forest, all of them trapped in the demon's realm. She knew that she had to find a way out, but she didn't know how. She wandered through the forest, for what felt like hours, until she saw a glimmer of light in the distance. She ran towards it, hoping that it was a way out. As she got closer, she saw that it was a small cottage, nestled in a clearing. Maggie knocked on the door, and an old woman answered. The woman listened to Maggie's story and told her that she knew a way out of the demon's realm. She gave Maggie a vial of potion and told her to drink it when she was ready to leave. Maggie thanked the woman and drank the potion. Suddenly, she felt a rush of energy, and she was transported back to the mansion. She ran out of the mansion and never looked back. From that day on, Maggie knew that there were things in this world that were beyond her understanding. She had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death, and she vowed to never take risks like that again. Emma had always been afraid of the dark. As a child, she would hide under the covers whenever the lights went out, convinced that there were monsters lurking in the shadows. But as she grew older, Emma learned to control her fear. She bought a nightlight and made sure to leave the bathroom light on before going to bed. One night, Emma woke up to find that her nightlight had gone out. She tried to turn on the lamp on her nightstand, but it wouldn't turn on either. Emma began to panic. She was surrounded by darkness, and she could feel a familiar sense of terror creeping up inside her. But then, she heard a sound coming from her closet. It was a soft scratching noise, like something was trying to claw its way out. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she got out of bed and approached the closet. She opened the door slowly, bracing herself for what she might find. Inside the closet, she saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at her. They were red and angry, and Emma knew that they belonged to something that was not of this world. The creature emerged from the shadows, revealing itself to be a small demon with sharp teeth and long, clawed fingers. Emma was paralyzed with fear as it approached her. But then, something strange happened. The demon spoke to her, in a voice that was surprisingly gentle. "I'm sorry to scare you," the demon said. "I know that I look scary, but I'm just a lost soul looking for a way back to my world." Emma didn't know what to make of this. She had always believed that demons were evil creatures, meant to torment and harm humans. But as she looked into the demon's eyes, she saw something that she had never expected to see. a sense of sadness and loneliness that mirrored her own. The demon continued speaking to her, telling her about its life and how it had ended up in her world. Emma listened, and she found herself feeling empathy for the creature. And then, the demon asked her for a favor. It asked her to help it find a way back to its world, so that it could be reunited with its family. Emma hesitated, unsure of what to do. She had always been taught to fear demons, but now she saw that they were not all alike. In the end, she made a decision. She took the demon's hand and promised to help it find a way back to its world. Together, they set out on a journey, navigating the dark and dangerous world that lay beyond Emma's bedroom. And in the end, they succeeded. The demon found its way back to its world, and Emma learned a valuable lesson about the power of empathy and understanding. But even as she lay back in bed, safe and sound, Emma knew that she would never forget the strange and terrifying experience that had changed her life forever. Caroline had always loved exploring abandoned places. She loved the thrill of discovering hidden corners and forgotten treasures, and she loved the feeling of being somewhere that no one else had been in a long time. So when she heard about an old asylum on the outskirts of town, she knew that she had to check it out. Caroline drove out to the asylum one night, and with her flashlight and her camera, she slipped through the chain-link fence that surrounded the property and made her way inside. The asylum was dark and eerie, and Caroline felt a sense of foreboding as she made her way down the hallways. She heard strange noises and saw strange shadows, but she shrugged them off and kept going. Finally, she came to a door that was locked. Caroline tried to pick the lock, but it wouldn't budge. She was about to give up and leave when she heard a voice coming from the other side of the door. "Help me," the voice said. "Please, I need your help." Caroline was startled. She had been alone in the asylum, and she hadn't heard anyone else enter. But now she could hear the voice, clear as day. She hesitated for a moment, then decided to try and break down the door. She backed up and ran at it, throwing her weight against it. The door gave way with a loud crash, and Caroline stumbled into the room beyond. She saw a figure in the corner, huddled in the darkness. "Are you okay?" Caroline asked. The figure looked up, and Caroline saw that it was a young woman, dressed in a hospital gown. The woman's eyes were wide with fear, and she looked as though she had been through hell. "They are coming for me," the woman said. "Please, you have to help me." Caroline didn't know what to do. She had never been in a situation like this before, and she didn't want to leave the woman behind. She took the woman's hand and started to lead her out of the room. But as they walked down the hallway, Caroline realized that something was wrong. The asylum was no longer silent and deserted. She heard a sound of footsteps coming from behind her, and she felt a cold breeze on the back of her neck. Caroline turned around and saw a group of men in white coats, their faces twisted with anger and hate. They were coming for the young woman, and they weren't going to let her go without a fight. Caroline realized too late that she had made a terrible mistake. She had broken into an asylum that was still in use, and she had put herself and the young woman in danger. As the men closed in, Caroline felt a wave of panic wash over her. She tried to fight back, but it was no use. They overpowered her and took the young woman away, leaving Caroline alone in the